Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why some experts claim social media is totally fine for kids, while others act like it is a public health disaster? It feels like we are reading two different stories about the exact same apps. If they are looking at the same data, why on earth do they come to such different conclusions about whether Instagram or TikTok are hurting our teens? It is the great mystery of this field, and it boils down to how we slice and dice the information. Think of it like looking at a blurry photo. Some people use a filter that blurs everything into a gray mush, while others zoom in on the sharp, painful details. Today, we are going to look at two sneaky habits scientists have that can hide the truth about how these apps actually affect our kids. First, let us talk about how we measure risk. In the social sciences, researchers often look for a correlation, which is basically a fancy way of saying two things change together. If a p-value is like a flucometer, a correlation is like a seesaw, but here's the problem. If you only look at the average, you might miss the kids who are really suffering. In medical research, they use something called relative risk. Think of relative risk as a scoreboard. If you smoke, your odds of getting lung cancer go way up compared to someone who does not. That gap is the relative risk. When researchers ignore this and just look at tiny average changes across a whole population, they are basically burying the danger. They hide the heavy users who are struggling behind the massive group of people who are just using apps normally. It is like saying the average car crash victim only suffers a minor bruise, totally ignoring the people who ended up in the hospital. The second trap is something called blending. This is where things get really messy. Imagine you are trying to study how sugar affects your health, but instead of just measuring candy, you mix it into a blender with kale, rocks, and dirt. Then you drink that, feel fine, and conclude that sugar has no effect. That is what is happening here. Some studies mash together every single screen interaction, from checking a work email to scrolling TikTok, and then call it overall screen time. They even mash together grown adults and little kids, or boys and girls. But the reality is that the impact of social media is not the same for everyone. When you mix a 14-year-old girl during her most vulnerable years with a grown man sitting at a desk, you dilute the signal so much that it looks like nothing is happening at all. When you actually zoom in on those specific groups, the picture changes entirely. We start seeing what the researchers call the thick rope conclusion. Instead of a tiny, barely there link, we see a strong, clear connection between heavy social media use and real mental health struggles. The scientists who report that social media is harmless are often relying on what they call the thin reed conclusion, which comes from that messy blending process that makes the danger practically disappear. But it gets even weirder. A lot of these studies are looking at mental health, but completely ignoring the other stuff that is happening on these apps. Even if someone tells you there is no link between an app and depression, that does not mean the app is safe. It is like telling a parent their kid is safe because they do not have a cold, while ignoring that they are walking across a dangerous highway. We are seeing kids being exposed to stuff they should never see, getting sucked into addictive feedback loops, and being hit by predatory adults. These are not just mental health checkboxes, they are massive real-world dangers. The bottom line is that we need to be much smarter about how we talk about tech. When you hear an expert say the evidence is weak, ask yourself what they are blending together. Are they picking one specific group, or are they averaging a massive disconnected crowd? Personally, I think this research is a wake-up call. It is easy to hide the truth in big spreadsheets, but when you look at the actual lives of teenagers, the risks are hard to deny. We need better data that looks at individual platforms because Instagram does not work the same way as a messaging app. We also need to stop obsessing over broad averages and start paying attention to the kids who are in the deep end of the pool. Future research should focus on these specific pathways. We need to know exactly which features of an app drive certain behaviors. But in the meantime, caution is the best policy. We should not be treating kids like social media test subjects until we have, at the very least, a clear picture of what is actually happening. Thanks for hanging out in the Mind Lab today. If you found this breakdown helpful, please hit that like button and share this with a teacher or a parent who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below. Does this change how you view your own screen time? We love reading your thoughts. Catch you in the next one.